Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session in the afternoon. Just to make sure that you are not entering the wrong room, this is room 5. And the topic is boost your emotional intelligence to move from good UX to great. My name is Shuangshuang, and I will be moderating this session. So before the session starts, I would like to give you a few notes. During the presentation, if you have any questions for the speaker, please enter the question into the Q&A tab. There's also an option to ask questions anonymously if you would like to do so. If you have any technical issues, please reach out to an SFG technician. You can just search SFG in the People tab. Okay, so let's welcome our speaker, Priyama Barua, who is the Vice President and Experienced Strategist at Marge. And now I hand it over to her for the presentation.
Thanks so much, Shang. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well today and enjoying the conference. As Shang said, I'm Priyama Barua. I lead the experience strategy capability at Merge Boston. Merge is an integrated design, technology, and marketing company. And for those of you who've been around the UX world long enough in Boston, you may know of Beam Interactive, and that's one of the companies that has formed Merge. So today I'll be talking about emotional intelligence and why it's important in a UX career. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about me and what I do, and really why should I be talking about this topic? So I'm someone who spent a lot of time learning and relearning about UX, about experience strategy, about service design. And I like to use that learning and give that back to the community. So whether it's designing a service design jam over a weekend, teaching people in suits how to get accustomed to the design methods, teaching other practitioners how to use some of the tools that we utilize so they're successful in their companies. And then speaking about topics that no one else is talking about and things I experience as someone who hasn't lived here in my entire life. And then being part of panels that are not related to design. So I'm bringing the design conversation into spaces that it hasn't gone before. And then speaking more and learning and sharing whatever I can. And being part of books with other professionals. Volunteering in the community, and also creating design tools for other people. But the gist of this is that I, through my career, have found myself in places where I'm the only one who looks like I do and speaks like I do. And oftentimes I come up against situations that are hard to handle. So there, my emotional intelligence is something that I realize I need to work on. So what do I do in my day job? Some of you may recognize the term experience strategy, but for others that don't, it sits at the intersection of many of the methods that we're familiar with, but in short, it kind of takes an in-depth look at people's experiences with entire products and services and systems, really. And all of that information then goes back to businesses that are looking to shape their experience for the future. So to help their company become more experience-led and competing on the basis of experience. At Merge, what's different is that we take this understanding and we form that vision, but we can also execute upon that vision. So that means I'm working with a lot of people that don't speak the language of design, so whether that's CRM people, there's contact strategy, content strategy, and then digital strategy, and so many more capabilities as being part of an integrated agency. In this topic, I thought was very important for a variety of reasons. Firstly, some of you may have been in this field for a very long time, others may just be entering, but the nature of how design is practiced has changed so much. It's changed in the 15 years that I've been part of it. And I'm constantly having to adapt to different situations. And I do find that people that come into the industry are not really equipped to handle some of the conversations that happen at the intersections of many different disciplines. We soon learn that we don't have a seat at the table, and we need to create one. And this is something that people ask me over and over. How do you create how do you create that seat, and how do you explain the value of design? Because you will come against people that are non-believers, and I do. And those interactions cannot always go seamlessly. There's a lot of friction in those interactions. And I do feel that a lot of the UX people that I meet have chosen this field because they're truly passionate about making a change, of making an impact in whatever way they can. But impact only happens where influence exists. And today I'll talk a little bit about influence as well. And in my observation, climbing the UX ladder is largely dependent on the domains and competencies of emotional intelligence. And this is something I saw in my own career as well as those of others. So to begin with, I want to kind of level set on what is our common understanding of emotional intelligence. So first of all, I'm in a weird setup here. So if I'm looking down, I'm looking at your chat responses because my laptop is down here. But I'd love for you to enter into chat your responses to these 3 prompts. If you could give me a clue as to which prompt you're responding to, that would be much appreciated so I can follow along your thoughts. And remember to use the session chat, not the event chat, so I can see what you're typing in. So let's take 20 seconds. I'd love to see what you think emotional intelligence is. Thank you. Trust, compassion, leadership, and authenticity. Yep, absolutely. And empathy to make progress, definitely a huge part of this, which I'll talk more about later. Communication, so core, and being able to communicate effectively. Again, empathy, yep. Self-aware, foundation of emotional intelligence. Relations, I'll talk more about relationship building later today, and absolutely important to emotional intelligence. Being able to listen, not everyone has that skill, yep, to really, really listen. The quiz, yes, there's so many of them out there. I haven't personally taken one recently, but I remember taking one long ago, but I won't be able to recommend one if you have that question. Other people's point of view, yes, for those of you who were in the session before this, where we talked about how you use art critique techniques in design, I thought that was really interesting and feeds into this conversation. If you didn't hear it, I recommend you listening to the recording. Well, thank you for playing along, people. These are some things about emotional intelligence, descriptions of emotional intelligence and definitions that I found that are written by Daniel Goleman. He's a recognized expert in this field. He says it's the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions, and then recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. So that's one way of looking at it. And the other kind of definition is more around what happens if you're emotionally intelligent. You perform at a higher level, and a lot of people feel like this complements IQ. And a lot of people even talk about EQ being more important than IQ in a lot of jobs. To be very honest, I don't think either one of these definitions is comprehensive. So today I really want to deep dive into the domains and competencies of emotional intelligence. So let's start here. The domains and competencies of emotional intelligence, as defined by a lot of experts in these fields, it first starts at the individual level. So number one, self-awareness, especially emotional self-awareness, being able to recognize and really parse out and identify the emotions that you're feeling at any given time. Secondly, there's self-management, and this has many different blocks under it. The first is emotional self-control, which is keeping your rational brain dominant over your irrational brain at all times. And today I'll talk a lot more about these 2 first competencies. Adaptability. So in a design profession, it's so important to be comfortable with the uncomfortable as the messy and frankly sometimes frustrating design process evolves. And a lot of UXers and designers and people related to the field are not as adaptable as someone who's emotionally intelligent. Having an achievement orientation and a growth mindset is the foundation. Wanting to change, realizing you can change, and I'll talk more about this later today. And I recognize that people here probably already have an achievement orientation just by the fact that you're here. And then having a positive outlook. When those changes happen within an organization, within teams, are you able to look at it as something that you can use positively, or do you get bogged down by the things that are happening within yourself and with the environment that you're in? And then we move into the social level of things. There is social awareness, where empathy is paramount. And we talk a lot about empathy for users in our field, but oftentimes in some of the questions that I field in panels and other talks that I give, I get the sense that we don't have that same sense of empathy for our stakeholders, for our teammates, where when we're in situations where they don't understand us, how do we handle those situations? And I'll talk about this a little bit more later today. And being aware of the organization, the culture, the process, the things that need to happen to make a decision, being fully aware of that creates the last bucket that I'm going to talk about, which is relationship management. So relationship management can also be further broken down. Firstly, there is influence. I talked about this earlier. For any UXer, you are trying to impact change, and to impact change, influence is paramount. As you grow in your career, you will have opportunities to coach others and mentor others. So being able to create a strong foundation in the rest of the competencies is important in that. Conflict management. A lot of UXers do not like conflict. And today I'll talk about how you can reframe conflict in a positive manner. And then teamwork, again, talking about teamwork with people who are not even UXers, not part of your UX world. And lastly, inspirational leadership. So you've kind of mastered all of this and you become someone that people look to be inspired in their field and to grow themselves. So these are the domains and competencies. In the interest of time, I'll talk about a few of these more deeply. I'll leave some out only because I don't have time to go through all of them. But before I do that, I want to start with telling you about my own journey of self-reflection. I talked a little bit earlier about how I really tried to engage in the community. And as I was doing that, as I was engaging with other people, I found that I was lacking in my own emotional intelligence. I could be doing a lot better. So when I started writing this talk, I reflected on where I was when I started, maybe about 5 years ago. And the gray boxes are where I ranked myself really low. And the light green boxes are where I thought I did kind of okay. And the green boxes are places where I thought I was a lot better at. As you can see here, it's not that they're all interdependent, and I'll talk about them later, but it's not like you have to have one to have the other, but they do kind of connect with each other. So looking at really reflecting on what my strengths is and thinking about where I'm not balanced helped me grow. So where do I think I am today? This may look different if you ask someone else to rate me, but this is where I think I am. I've grown a lot in my emotional self-awareness. As I was writing this talk, I was getting into Slack conversations with people that were really pissing me off. And I was like, oh, I'm really lacking in my emotional self-control. I need to work on this right now. And there are a lot of things that that I think I need to get better at relationship management, especially as I grow in my career and grow higher in my career. So that was about me and my self-reflection, but let's dive into some of these and see what you can do if you want to work on these competencies. So Can you believe it? There's a formula for that, for awareness and self-control. It's called the rational emotive behavior theory. And that's the formula there. And today I'll talk you through how you can apply the formula yourself and how I have kind of done that in my life as well. So let's start from the beginning. A is the activating event, something that you're kind of paying attention to at this moment. Is a thing that seems a little bit out of the ordinary of our regular life, and it's caught our attention. And it's a situation in which we want to better manage our emotional reaction. The event is then added, is additive to your irrational beliefs. Irrational beliefs are the absolutes that we apply to ourselves and to the people around us. And they're very instrumental in controlling our emotional consequence. So the emotional consequence is what happens as a result of A and IB interacting with each other. And I'll give you examples of this in a second. And I do feel that irrational belief is one that may not be as easily understood, so I'll dive into that a little bit more as well. So into irrational belief, it's the absolutes, shoulds, oughts, must, have tos that we apply on on ourselves and others. So people should be nice to me. They ought to know I'm an expert. They must know how hard I've worked on this. They have to recognize that this is not the way to go forward. It's kind of like the reflective self-talk, the automatic self-talk that happens when a situation happens to us that we feel we're not capable to handle. It's kind of like a self-defeating inner monologue. But it's compounded very heavily by something called an amygdala hijack. So this is, again, a term which was made by Daniel Goleman. In this situation, what's happening is that our brains have not evolved beyond the times that we were cavemen, where we were surrounded by constant threats on our lives, where there's a snap of a twig and we think that we're going to be attacked by something that's going to take away our lives. So we have not evolved past that point. So when an event happens that is nowhere on the scale of being attacked by a man-eating tiger, we still react in that same way. And there's this fight or flight response that kicks in. And our automatic reaction is way out of sync with the event that has happened. So that's the irrational belief. Let's kind of look at what that means in a design scenario, a design career. So critique. Almost all of us have experienced this, whether it is design, research, a plan, a presentation you've done. But someone critiques my design, and then I apply my rational belief to it, which is, take your pick. It could be that no one should criticize me. They must know how hard I worked on this. I worked all night. I've given it so much thought. They have to recognize me as the expert. I've been through so many years of school. I have so many years of experience. They don't know what they're talking about. And all of this comes together to create an emotional consequence. I get offended and I'm a little outraged and I'm red in the face. And all of this creates the actual consequence, which is I get defensive. I dispute the critique without fully considering what that other person is saying. I lash out sometimes belligerently and not being able to make sense of what I'm trying to say. And the real consequence of this is I fail to communicate the deep thought, the deep reasoning I have given to my decision. And I alienate the person I'm interacting with. I also alienate the people who are observing this interaction. And eventually, the design outcome suffers as a result of the loss of that relationship and the failure to communicate. But the formula is not complete yet. So let's complete the formula. So we learned about A, B, and C. But then there is D. D is the process of disputation. It's the process by which we can dispute those irrational beliefs that we have in the previous section we talked about. And that helps us to better manage our emotions and lead to a greater emotional outcome. What does that look like in practice? And before that, let's talk about disputation a little bit more. It's really an acquired skill, at least for a lot of people. It's something that I've realized is built into how parenting is done and how a lot of parents interact with their child's emotional reactions. But a lot of people didn't have that. So they need to acquire the skill in their adulthood. And it's really, really, really hard to do. It is the way we scrutinize our absolute irrational beliefs and we pressure test our rationales. We ask ourselves, can you prove to yourself that you are the expert? Do you know for a fact that that person knows you've worked all night on this? Do you know for a fact that person doesn't know what they're talking about? So we start to question ourselves. It's our inner voice, our self-talk. And this is an avenue to control our emotional reactions to A and B. So in practice, when someone critiques my design and I feel like they shouldn't have, and I'm offended and I'm outraged, can I think this through a little bit more? Is it true that they know and care how hard I worked? They probably do not. Where is the evidence that I'm the expert? I probably may have 2 master's degrees, but I may not be the expert on that particular topic we're talking about, and things may have changed since I last learned about it. How have I come to believe that my work should not be criticized, especially when criticism is what leads to a better outcome? If we talk to ourselves that way, whether you're in the situation or if that's difficult, maybe after the fact, over time, you start to build a greater emotional outcome, which is you're unfazed. You get curious about what the other person is saying. And in some instances, you feel challenged. You want to do better. You want to work with that person to see, okay, how can I bring their point of view into what I'm trying to do to make something a lot better? So the true consequences is you hear their point of view. You respond calmly with rationale and reasoning, so you're able to put across your points. And you talk through the critique. We learned in the previous section. What do you see that in the previous session? What do you see that makes you say that? And the real consequences of that is you learn from a valid critique. This is very important to the achievement orientation that we talked about earlier. And it improves the design outcome, and the team as a whole builds trust. You build trust with that person, and you build trust with the other people that are observing that interaction. So hopefully all that made sense. After my drink of water, I'm going to move to a few other topics. Self-management, and under that, there's achievement orientation. I only chose to talk about some and not others because I was worried about running out of time. So achievement orientation, it begins with the realization, this is something that one of my colleagues helped me see when I was writing this talk, that you need to realize that things can change. That's kind of the first step. We're sometimes too absolute when evaluating ourselves. And an example of that is about 6 years ago, I told my manager, I don't think I'll ever be a good manager. I don't think I'll ever want to manage people. I'm not sure that's the right way for me to grow in my UX career. And now I manage a whole team of people. I manage a whole capability and department. Why? Because I realized that things can change and I didn't hold myself to that absolute belief. Secondly, do you really want to change where you are now? Because if you don't, you got to really reflect on, do you think you've reached the top of your career? Do you think you've reached the top of your skills? Because if you think that way, and most likely you don't, because again, like I said, you're here listening to this conversation, there are always so many new things to learn in skills, in our interpersonal interactions, just all of that. And then thirdly, having that foundational of self-awareness and emotional self-control is very important, because when you're reflecting on your achievement orientation, reflecting on your own strengths, reflecting on your weaknesses, it can be a little bit turbulent, because you're especially when you're kind of working with someone else to do that. Are you ready to embrace the feedback that they're giving you? Are you ready to embrace the feedback that you're giving yourself, more importantly? And reacting to it positively is so important. Then there is the will to put in the work to make those changes. The formula that I just gave you, it's taken me 3 years to really put it into practice, and I still do it. I still need it. And then there are times there are emotional ups and downs. There are situations you handle really badly, and afterwards you think to yourself, why did I say that? Like, you really reflect on the situation and you said, okay, other people were making just as much of sense as I was. Why did I react that way? So being able to comfortably react back to, look back to situations is important. And realizing that challenges and these roadblocks that we face are important. And you will only have that outlook if you have that positive outlook, which are one of the competencies of emotional intelligence. Secondly, let's talk about social awareness and empathy. I know as designers, we talk about empathy a lot. It's used in so many different scenarios. But here, the first point I want to talk about is when we're working with other people who don't see our point of view. I feel that in design ops, in design conversations, we get so caught up in helping them see our point of view that we fail to see what their challenges are, what their stakeholders are kind of imposing on them that they need to deliver on, their metrics. So starting all conversations with what is important to you? How can we truly help you do your job best? It's really the foundation of relationship management, which is the next domain that I'll talk about. Because only once you have empathy and good kind of self-control, do you really get good at relationship management. And this last bullet is kind of like reflecting our ability to empathize with users, and kind of how do you communicate that? How do you spread that out to other stakeholders who are then able to put themselves in the shoes of their users? As we all know, it's really hard to do. But by truly honing our own empathy skills, are we able to radiate that outwards? And then last two topics here are influence and conflict management, very interrelated. Influence, I read the sentence in this book that I referenced at the bottom, The Power Paradox, and it really hit me. Influence is gained by people who improve others' lives. In a design environment, whether you're an in-house UX designer or you are a consultant like me, how do you kind of gain that influence is by demonstrating that your job, your process, your skills is going to improve that other person's life. When I say life, I mean their metrics, their job, their outcomes. And really having that self-awareness that we talked about earlier gives you a kind of realistic self-confidence. So as you gain influence and you grow in the UX career, you're expected to be good at a lot of different things, but being reflective of what you're good at and then asking for help when you're not good at something and being open to that help is so important. We hear this a lot, that we need to be authentic as people to be good leaders and to have that influence. And how do you do that? It's really by being open to being vulnerable that creates that influence. But more importantly, it is very hard to keep influence. You may master all of those domains and competencies that we've talked about, but once you've reached influence, once you gain influence, power can be corrupting. And if you fall into that trap, you kind of start losing some of the other competencies, like empathy, like being able to control yourself and understanding the other person's point of view. So keeping influence is very depending on maintaining the competencies that you've gained. And then one of the other ways to do that is being grateful for everything around you and maintaining that sense of empathy and avoiding the corrupting effects of influence, lifting other people up as you gain that influence. And conflict management. I kept this for last because I feel that a lot of people in this field, especially newer people coming in, even people who've been in the field for a very long time, avoid conflict. They look at conflict as a negative thing, and they prefer to smooth things over or stay out of it entirely. I do feel that the previous slide that we talked about, influence, is a very important part of conflict management. Because only once you're able to successfully gain influence will you be able to successfully manage conflict and create change. So you have to gain people's trust. You would know this, that once you enter an organization, you can't immediately start managing conflict and creating change and creating friction, even if it's good friction. You have to wait. You have to let people get to know you. You have to get to know other people. You have to gain that trust and influence. It's the same for when we're working with external stakeholders as consultants. You know, we get asked often, why are you spending so much time in stakeholder interviews? Yes, it's a way for us to understand their point of view and understand the project focus, but it's also a method of them getting to know us and beginning to believe that this person is going to make my life better. They're going to improve things and they know what they're talking about. So it's kind of like connected to the previous slide. And then if we have that emotional self-control and apply that formula the way we talked about it, we'd be able to approach conflict a whole lot better. Recognizing the need for conflict or the good fight, and the emphasis really is on the good over there. It's what brings about change. It's a very balanced situation, because too much conflict and you end up in alienation, you end up in an impasse, no one wants to talk to you again. But not raising healthy friction where it's needed will prevent you from rising in your career, because you let things slide instead of changing and making things better. Everyone is uncomfortable in the face of change, but it is needed to make important advances in the organization. And this is especially important in the experience strategy, the field that I work in, and innovation, because you're operating on that knife edge of friction, because you want things to stay as they are, but also improve a lot more than it currently is. But you get a lot of pushback of, this is working, why change something that's already working so well? And you are almost always in that situation of being up against or having to create a healthy friction. Right, last couple of minutes here. I hope the previous slides and talking more deeply about some of those competencies helped. But of course, this is something you can read a lot about. I'll give you some reading recommendations next. But these are the things that I did, and hopefully the things that you can do. So firstly, starting by reflecting on your own strengths in the domains and competencies. Maybe do it the way that I just showed you that I did mine. You can do this yourself if you're naturally self-reflective, or like I did, you can ask other people. You can ask your mentors, your managers, your coworkers, and open yourself up for that feedback. You can once you identify the competencies that you need to round out your emotional intelligence, that's half the battle won. It'll take time to build it, but at least you are truly understanding of what you're good at and what you need to get better at. And then think back to situations that's something that I do. Think back to situations I could have handled a lot better than I did, and talk to someone about them, that this happened and this is what happened. This is how I reacted. This is what I said. What should I have said? And then thirdly, the thing we talked about, that amygdala hijack, really read more about it. It's very interesting. For me, it was a huge part of reframing how I think about situations, because I realized that it's really biology. It's not me, it's biology that's failing me in the situation. And then apply your UX skills to improve your emotional intelligence. Start tracking, what do you want to change in your life? You want to be better at design? Do you want to be better at working with a team? Do you want a seat at the UX table, at the leadership table? Do you want to feel more in control? Because it feels a little like a loss of control when you are not able to emotionally control yourself and influence other people. And then eventually, as you grow, can you help others? If you're in positions of mentorship and coaching, can you help others in their emotional intelligence? And then read, watch, observe, and mimic. Mimic is something that I did a lot of by watching other people that I thought are great UXers. What are they doing differently that no one else is? Right, and here are some reading recommendations. I'm a quick reader, so sometimes I just go to Blinkist and just let it playing. It gives you, if you haven't used it, it's an awesome app. And thanks for listening, and thanks to all of these people who helped me. I will mention that it's easy to talk about emotional self-control, but it's really hard to go on that journey if you have foundational troubles with anxiety, and other mental health issues. And I did. And so I talked to my therapist about it and overcame them before I even began this journey, or along with this journey. So remember, if you're working with a mental health therapist, you can always talk to them about this. Okay, I would love to hear any questions you guys might have.
Thank you so much, Priyama, for that wonderful talk. I'm going to share some Q&As here. One early question that came in is if you have any suggestions for EQ quizzes to take.
Yeah, I saw that come in. That's actually one I don't have. I'm sorry. I don't have one that I know works really well, so I don't want to recommend it. You can Google search it and find one that works for you.
Thanks so much. And then this question comes from Mitch. So having identified one's strengths and weaknesses, do you think it's more impactful to further develop strengths or try to shore up weaknesses?
Oh my God, that's an excellent question. I think they kind of go hand in hand. As I talked about how the interdependencies that I observed within those competencies, try and think about whether your strengths is tied to other competencies that you may be weak in. So work on them maybe together. So kind of come at it at two different ways. So for example, if you're talking about conflict management, maybe you're already kind of good at conflict management, not so good at influence. How can you get better at influence so your conflict management gets a little bit better? That makes sense.
And this comes from Holly. She wondered what other psychology-based resources where we have that can learn more.
Oh, some of those books that I gave. I recently been learning about DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. It's kind of like CBT, but applied in different ways. So if this is something that you feel like you want to grow more in, there are excellent DBT programs across Boston. I won't recommend any because I don't want to get into trouble, but you can Google it.
Great, and we have a question about the guitar in the background. What kind of stuff you like to play, of course.
So this is funny because all my coworkers ask me about it, and I always say that I forget to pick it up, and it has like a layer of dust. So if I run my finger over it, I'll come out with a layer of dust. But the answer to that question is, whenever I play the guitar, it really throws me off when someone else starts singing with me. So I always try to learn songs that I know no one else will know. So if people ask me to play it, no one sings along with me.
That's awesome. And I think that's a great way to build rapport as well, having that conversation. And this comes from James. Great talk. How do you recommend improving disputation skills in the spur of the moment?
Yes, I actually think it's really hard to do in the spur of the moment to begin with. I think if that's something you struggle with, the emotional self-control and the irrational beliefs, start doing it after the fact. when you're out of that situation and you're reflecting and you're calm, you're going for a walk, and think about how you could have applied disputation to that situation. And that's what I did. And then you can slowly start applying it to that situation. Always helps me to take a deep breath, wait till I react to what someone else has said. So that gives me some time to talk to myself. It's really about self-talk.
Absolutely. And then our last question comes from, second to last question comes from Ting. Just wondered how you could recommend to us as designers to politely interrupt and just stop the argument, without going too far away from the main topic due to the limitation, like time limitation, in design reviews.
Yes. Two methods that I've used and seen others use. One is creating a parking lot at the beginning of the conversation. So a lot of times we're using tools like stickies and notice boards and mirror boards. So always have one section, which is the parking lot. And being able to say, I love where this conversation is going. I can clearly see everyone is very invested in where we land on this decision. But I do want to bring us back to the focus of today's conversation. So I'm going to put this in the parking lot just so we don't forget to come back to it later. So interjecting and saying that this is important. So acknowledging people's emotions and investment in that conversation, but also reframing it as something that's not going to be forgotten. We're going to bring it back later.
That's going to be my big takeaway from this session because I run into that a lot. Thanks so much. And then our last question comes from Laura. Can you tell us about a project success you had when you applied EQ to UX or stakeholder situations?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. I can say one of a really difficult project that I worked on is a very hard stakeholder who was clearly not happy that I was leading the project and undermined me and interrupted me every situation that came across. So in that situation, I realized that I'm letting it slide. I was in control of my emotions by that point. Maybe a few years earlier, I would have lost it back at them. But at that point, I had gained my emotional self-control in my inner zen. But I realized I can't let this slide. This is not something that I should find acceptable. So bringing up friction, having a conversation with that person, pushing back with that person, in different situations helped me gain that person's respect as she learned that I am not someone who she can roll over, steamroll over basically. So gaining influence in that relationship by bringing up healthy conflict is something that I practiced. And we're still in touch and we are great pals now.
Great, thank you so much. That concludes the Q&A portion.
Okay, thank you, Kay, for asking a question for us. And thank you, Priyama, for such a great presentation. If you enjoyed the session, please show your appreciation, show applause for Priyama in the chat. And for those who want to continue the discussion about this session or any other topics, you can go to the UXPA Slack channel. And the next session in this room is a 10-minute talks, which will start at 3 p.m. And finally, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and please remember to fill out the session survey with your feedback. Goodbye.